I'm Katie Wethman with the My Move DMV team, and I am joined by one of our favorite lenders, Leslie Wish at Fairway Independent Mortgage Company. And I asked Leslie here to join us today because we have some clients who find themselves in a divorce situation, and they have a lot of questions, wondering where to start, both from a financial perspective, from the home selling perhaps perspective, which of course we can help with that. But some of the finances get really tricky. So I asked Leslie to join us today to just talk through some of the process from her end, things that she would need to know, and basically just Leslie, help us kind of understand, like, how does it work when someone wants to buy out their spouse as part of a divorce?
And things can get a little bit tricky in these types of situations. So the most important thing is to have all the information up front as somebody embarks on trying to make this happen. So typically what can happen is when somebody wants to buy out their spouse, meaning you have one spouse that wants to remain in the property after the divorce happens, lenders will do this as a refinance. We call it a spousal buyout refinance. And sometimes couples will use the equity in their home to buy out their spouse. So, and that way then they can remove the spouse from the title to the home, and then the home would just be in one spouse's name after that. Sometimes couples will trade their assets for the equity in the home. So a refinance may still need to happen, but the one spouse remaining in the home may not need to pull the equity out of the home. It really just depends on each person's specific situation. So an example of that would be, say the marital home is valued at $800,000 and the mortgage balance is $300,000. This means that there's $500,000 in equity that can be negotiated as part of the marital settlement agreement. And if the couple is splitting 50-50, which oftentimes is the case, then each person would be able to walk away technically with $250,000 of equity. So the spouse who wants to remain in the home will work with the lender to pull that amount, $250,000 out, and it would have to be added to the current mortgage balance in order to be able to have the money to give to the spouse who is leaving. So I should also mention that the spouse who won't be living in the property and who will be leaving will most likely want to be removed from the mortgage loan so that they're not liable for that loan in the future and are freed up to find another home without having the marital mortgage loan counted as part of their debt to income ratio on a new home purchase. So that spouse will have to execute a document turning over their ownership interest to the spouse who's remaining in the marital home in exchange for removing their name from the mortgage and receiving the equity out of the home. So that's how that works, specifically from the standpoint of a spouse who's wanting to stay in the home and a spouse that's moving on to something else.
Okay, and that's an important warning or pitfall for people to be looking out for, about if you're the one that's moving out of the house, making sure that you get your name off of the mortgage. However, the other spouse intends to kind of do that. You want to make sure that that debt load is not on your record, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. That is going to be very important as part of the process moving forward, for sure.
Any other pitfalls or tips and tricks that you want to share that you've seen be helpful for people?
Yeah, so first off, it's really important when I receive calls on this topic, the first thing I typically ask is, do you have a signed marital settlement or property settlement agreement? That is going to be really important because as a lender, we can't close a loan for you unless you have a signed agreement. And the thing about the signed agreement is it tells the underwriter or the lender that, you know, what you're obligated for. So if you're the spouse that's having to make maybe support payments to the other spouse, or if you're the spouse who's receiving payments, support payments, we need to know what you are obligated for. So that's the reason that the signed agreement is important, because it basically tells us how everything's being split up. It also tells us how the marital home is being dealt with. So that's really important. That's the first thing that we need to know. But I always encourage people to, before they sign any agreement, to talk with us, the lender, and a lender who knows how to work with these types of situations, because they are tricky and there's a lot of twists and turns. So we can give advice and strategy up front. And oftentimes I even have the family law attorneys calling and consulting with me directly with the permission of their client, so that they know before going into negotiations what they should be asking for. Because the last thing you want to have is an agreement that says you can have the house, but then let's say you can't qualify to keep the house, or you're leaving the house because you want to go buy another house, but maybe you can't qualify. So these are things that you definitely want to talk with lenders up front, make sure you're pre-approved, even if you're in the very beginning stages of negotiations and you don't think this is going to be negotiated out for 6 months or longer. So that's, I always encourage and tell people that they really need to be careful and not jump the gun, because they need to have all the information at hand so that they can make a good decision. Then their attorney can advise them properly in terms of making sure that they're protected once the final agreement is signed.
Okay, so starting early, that sounds like a great tip. And I know it's one that we always appreciate too. Months and months in advance, or sometimes even a year in advance of when we're actually going to be listing a home, we encourage those early conversations. And it sounds like that's the case on the lender side, especially.
Right. So people should definitely be open to doing that, as well as, just having those conversations, like you said, with you up front to start to understand, timing for the home, value of the home, things of that nature, which you all can help with as well. One thing I want to mention is spousal and child support payments, either being paid out or received. So as I had mentioned, this is going to be really important as part of how these agreements are negotiated and how the lender looks at those. So when you are paying out support payments, of course, the lender is going to see that in your marital settlement agreement, and that is going to be counted against you in your debt to income ratio for any new home that you would want to purchase. So know that that is going to be something that will be taken into consideration. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky for some people. So I've had people call me and say, hey, I'm going to stay in the house and refinance and take my spouse off of the home, and I'm being paid, let's say, $10,000 a month from my spouse. And it's going to start, next month. And, we need to go ahead and get this done right away. But as a lender, I have to back them up and say, that's great, you're going to be receiving that money, but you have to receive those support payments for at least 6 months. And we as the lender have to document that you have received those payments into your account for 6 months consistently in the same amount. So we've had cases in the past where the spouse who was paying the support maybe didn't pay on time, and that would be a disqualifier. We'd have to start the clock ticking over again, 6 months to start counting. Or we've had a case where the spouse has said, I can't really pay this month, I'm just going to give you double next month. And then from just a regular living standpoint, you're just a person living their life, you're thinking that's no big deal, I'm still getting my money. From the lender, though, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do require that the amounts are paid based on the way it's written in the property settlement agreement. And again, paid consistently. That's the big buzzword. Every single month, you can't double up, or that clock will start ticking again at the beginning of the 6-month time frame. So the reason that that's important is if you are negotiating anything, any kind of timeline in your marital settlement agreements, because oftentimes those agreements will state the person who's remaining in the home will have to have the house refinanced, or it will be sold by X date. So that's why that's really important, and that all parties understand that those payments have to be received consistently in order for it to work for you.
Wow, that's great advice. I'm sure a lot of people don't know that that's the case. So the timing, it becomes really important there. Whether you're staying in the house or not staying in the house, it's important to know that timeline.
Correct.
So, speaking of like staying in the house and being able to afford the house and qualify for it, in today's interest rate environment, a lot of people are looking at interest rates that are a lot higher than what their current mortgage is at. So what advice do you have for them? Is there a way they can keep their current rate, or do they just need to refinance and qualify at today's rates?
So in most cases, they're going to have to refinance and qualify at the current market rate. So whenever that would be. A lot of people have loans from back in what I call the pandemic recession, where we had rates, in the 2 and 3% range. And that was kind of what I call like a 100-year flood event like that. We'll probably never ever see that again. So it's really hard to give those rates up. So that question is a common question. But typically you're going to have to get a brand new loan. It's just kind of the way the lender world works. But it's always worth checking with your loan servicer. There's a slight chance that you could potentially assume the loan from your ex. So it is worth checking to see if this is something that could possibly be done. And if so, in that slight chance that it is allowed, you want to make sure that the spouse who's moving on, that their name can be fully removed and they'd be released from liability on that loan. And you would also want to understand what their process is and what their timeline is. Oftentimes when we hear of people trying to assume loans, it's not as easy as it sounds, and it can take a long time. I've heard it taking 3 months to 6 months sometimes. So again, knowing those timelines, because again, you're going to have some dates in the property settlement or marital settlement agreement that you're going to have to consider. You're going to have to allow time for that so that everybody can meet the timelines in those agreements, if that's going to be the case. So always worth trying, probably not going to work in most cases, but if it does, it would be a great thing.
Okay, great. So another great point about timing and starting early, perhaps even before that MSA is signed and agreed to. So the sooner the better. So anybody, that's working with us or watching this video, please do reach out to Leslie or our team. We're happy to give you some advice and some guidance as you proceed in that process. And, if you've already got that signed agreement, that's okay. We can work with that too. Leslie and her team do a great job at finding solutions for people. That's one of the reasons we've worked with them for so long. Leslie, anything to add here before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered everything, but as you said, happy to help, happy to answer any questions just on a consulting basis, no charge. Happy to give advice and point people in the right direction if they need help.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your time and all your experience that you shared.
Thank you. Nice to see you.